Okay, something else I forgot to cover in these menus, and I keep forgetting some things, is speed and throttle length. So let's talk about throttle length first. Trim length is whether you want your trims to affect all the flight modes, some of the flight modes, one of the flight modes, whatever. By default, it's inhibited. And by the way, notice in normal, it's right here on the menu. But if you go into an idle up 1 and you want to set it, you have to go into the switch, and here it'll say trim length. All right. By default, they're inhibited. So what does that mean? Well, let's take a look by that. What that means is I'm in normal. I'm going to adjust my aileron trim. All right. And then I'm going to go into idle 1. Notice the trim goes back. All right. Which means if I'm flying and I trim in normal, get my helicopter trimmed, and I go into idle up, all my trims are gone. Well, maybe, just maybe, you want your trims to be all tied together. There's several steps you have to go through to do that. Or maybe you just want normal and idle 1 to be tied together and idle 2 not. You know, half dozen one, half dozen other. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do this. And it's a little odd, I must say. So under flight condition is, do you want the trims tied? Well, the first thing is if you want the normal trims to be tied, when you're flying in normal and you adjust a trim, to be tied to something else, you have to activate it. All right, so I just activated normal, which now means when I change a trim, it can also change the trims in the other mode. But in order to do that, I must activate that. So let me give you an example. I turned that on to activate. Let me go back here. Now watch. I'm in normal. I adjust trim. Okay, you see the aileron trim change. I go into idle 1. Notice it isn't linked. Well, gee golly, what the heck? Well, it's because you got to tell it what you want it to link to. So let's go back into flight condition, and let's say I want my idle 1 and normal to be linked. So when I turn on link, now they're linked together. So watch this. So I've activated that for idle 1 and normal. I'm going to come back out, and we're going to go back in here. So I'm in normal, as you see. Adjust the trim. Now when I go into idle 1, notice the trim stays the same. Idle 1, trim stays the same. I go into idle 2, because I didn't activate it in idle 2, it goes back to not being the same. So the bottom line is you can decide how you want the trims to be linked to those conditions depending on what you want to do. If I want idle 2 to also be linked, then I have to change it to activate. All right? Now watch this. This is something to remember. Let's say you trimmed in normal, and you trimmed it, and you tied a normal and idle up, then later you added idle 2 and you've trimmed. Well, realize idle 2 doesn't know, even though I linked it after the fact, it doesn't know that. All right, so what you might want to do to get all 3 linked up is go back to normal, reset the trim, go back to, now they're all linked again. Now retrim in normal. All right, retrim your heli, now they'll be linked again. So understand, if I link normal and idle 1, then when I trim, they'll be tied together. But idle 2, because it wasn't linked, didn't change. It remembered what it was. I went back in, turned on link to idle 2, and I have to retrim the linked conditions to get them all the same again. Hope that makes sense. Go into hold because I didn't do it. Watch. Back to 0. All right, so let's take a look at the next thing. I'm going to trim this out. All right, so let's go look at the next thing under flight condition. And that is speed. All right, speed of changing a flight condition. Again, this is weird. Just like in normal, you can set activate and the speed here, whereas in the other conditions, you actually have to go into the switch and set the speed. Same kind of deal. They have to be turned on and linked. So when I want to transition from one of these conditions into normal, I set the speed. What that means is how fast the servos. Now, normally these conditions only really change, unless you want to, how fast the throttle servo moves. So if I want to change speed, I can slow down the servo. All right, I can say how fast I want to make that transition. All right, so when I'm coming from one of these into normal, that's the speed. If I want idle 1 to have a speed, I have to go in here and I have to also set the speed here. 1 second, speed. Idle 1, switch, sorry, speed. Okay, And I can set the speed here. Now what that means is, once again, that will be the speed when I go into that condition, all right? Not when I'm exiting. If I'm going from idle 1 to normal, the normal speed will be used. If I'm going into idle 1, this speed will be used. Hope that makes sense. All right, so just realize that. I don't usually use that stuff, but what it is good for is, as a matter of fact, I saw this on a post. Let's say you go into hold and you're practicing an auto, and when you come out of hold, depending on which condition you're in, you want the throttle servo, let's say it's a nitro, you want the throttle servo to act a little slower. All right, now by the way, if you're using a governor, this really does nothing because the governor manages your throttle servo. Anyway, if you're not using a governor, let's say you are coming out of hold practicing an auto, and when you come out, you're in, say, idle up 2, and I come out of hold into idle up 2. Well, I may not want the servo to go right to the idle up 2 throttle curve and speed up the heli real quick. So I could say, hey, whenever I go into idle up 2, I want a delay. All right, or I want to slow that speed down, or the speed in which I transition. Make sense? That's what that's all about. That's what it can be used for. All right, so that's basically the two other functions in the condition menu.